Good morning, colleagues, and welcome to the second day of our Higher Education Conference. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker this morning. But before I get to that formality, I think I need to identify myself for those of you who were not at the performance last night. You missed an outstanding performance, so you need to come back next year to hear the same thing. My name is Devroop. I'm with the University of KwaZulu-Natal as the Performing Arts Cluster Academic Leader. That's a long title. Basically, it's just somebody who's in charge of the performing arts for you. It gives me great pleasure this morning in inviting and introducing Professor Kris Chesky, who is Professor of Music and Director of the Texas Center for Performing Arts Health at the University of North Texas. This year, I requested the organizing committee that we need to focus a bit more on the arts and arts-related issues. As we find in most countries that are pressed for finances and financial resources, the first areas that normally get compromised or sacrificed are the humanities and the arts. And the space for the arts in South Africa is being challenged. We are at a difficult place and time right now, and for some reason, us artists are being asked to legitimize our presence in the university. And we don't do that. We just comment on what's happening in society and we get on with our business. So this year I requested the committee to grant me some leeway in tabling one of the key themes at this year's conference that deals with performing arts. And I thought it interesting to bring Professor Chesky along. I got to know Professor Chesky some 10 years ago via my brother, who's somewhere here in the audience. And I found that the kind of work he was doing makes arts that much more interesting. When we talk about areas of interdisciplinarity and transdisciplinarity, these for us in music are strange concepts because we just take an instrument and we play and we draw on everything around us. But Kris has a way of having realized this in the center that he has set up for music and medicine. So I know that all of you are able to read, I gather, so you would be able to read his summary that we have in the program for you. And I just need to say that Professor Chesky is an incredible trumpet player, which most of you would have heard last night. That was without rehearsal, by the way. That was improvised on the fly. I hope that's not going to be the case of his presentation. But, I now would like to hand you over to Professor Chesky, and I will allow you at the end about 10 to 15 minutes time for questions. I must request you that when you do ask questions, please identify yourself so that we know where you come from. We just need to know whether you're medically sound in terms of his presentation this morning. Thank you very much, Professor Chesky.
No, thank you for that introduction, and thank you for having me this morning. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Last night was a lot of fun for me to be able to improvise, play some South African music. At least that's what I was told what we were playing was. And I do see some parallels between what we did last night and research, actually. Being able to get together across disciplines, interacting with researchers from various fields, to me, is a lot like getting together with musicians who don't know each other and making music together. So it's kind of an interesting parallel and an analogy. But anyway, as you can see from my slide up here, we're going to talk about occupational health in the music discipline. Interdisciplinary research drives change. And what I'm kind of referring to when I think about occupational health, or I use that term, I'm talking about something that was established over 300 years ago by a physician named Bernardino Ramazzini, who lived in Italy and has been labeled the father of occupational medicine. And what he was able to articulate in his book of occupational medicine, which is the first textbook on this subject, was the idea that people who came to his clinic or when he went to their house as a physician, he observed that a lot of the health issues that were manifesting themselves in this clinical space were common if a person, or common to a certain occupational activity. And he was the physician who kind of extended the diagnostic practice that was established prior to his writings, where he told the physician, gee, it's really important that you ask a person, what do you do? If I know what you do, I have a better chance of helping you with your medical problem. And interestingly, 300 years ago, and music was quite alive in those days, the days of Bach and Baroque music and Purcell and all that kind of stuff, is that when he was cataloging occupational problems, that he was seeing in various occupations, he actually identified the musician population as having a certain commonality of musculoskeletal problems, vocal health problems, and he even identified the instrument maker. In fact, the lute maker had various types of upper extremity musculoskeletal problems due to their extensive use of their hands all day carving wood, tying strings. And so we're looking at a phenomena or a topic that's very interesting and important to pretty much any occupational pursuit that has been identified for a long time and has recognized musicians as falling into this category of concern. But as any of you who have formal training in music probably thinking, gee, how come I was never introduced to that idea? I was never trained to be prepared for those kinds of concerns, those kinds of consequences related to what you do as a musician. The International Labor Organization and the World Health Organization, ever since the late 50s, have articulated what occupational health is by definition. And this is not the kind of slide I typically show, and I won't show more like this, but I thought this was important for us to get a global view of what kind of discipline this is and what it's intended to do by virtue of these definitions. So the main focus in occupational health is on three different objectives: the maintenance and promotion of workers' health and worker capacity, the improvement of working environment and work to become conducive to safety and health, 3, development of work organization and working cultures in a direction which supports health and safety at work, and in doing so also promotes a positive social climate and smooth operation, and may enhance productivity of the undertakings. The concept of working culture is intended in this context to mean a reflection of the essential values systems adopted by the undertaking concerned. Such a culture is reflected in practice in the managerial systems, personnel policy, principles for participation, training policies, and quality management of the undertaking. I'm going to take a second, kind of give you just a little hint at the kinds of problems that might manifest themselves in a musician, in this case, a colleague of mine back at the University of North Texas. The University of North Texas is a very large college of music within a pretty substantially sized regional Texas state institution. In fact, the College of Music at the University of North Texas currently is considered to be the largest in the country. It's a comprehensive program. It has all kinds of genres studied in various academic areas within music represented. And we have a very large faculty of elite performers and pedagogues of international acclaim. And I'm going to show you just a brief video, just to give you an example of what one of our faculty, who is talking in a symposium that we had last year about his personal experiences with these kinds of concerns. This is Dr. Eric Nessler. He's a classical saxophonist. He's a standout researcher in saxophone pedagogy, interpretation of literature. He's also done service as president of the International Saxophone Alliance. And here's just a little taste of what we're talking about trying to prevent.
This is how I played 2 years ago in 2014. In this video, you can see unwanted facial movement and a slight scooping of the tongue. Here's another example of me simply attempting to perform one of the easiest notes for the saxophone. What you are seeing and hearing is called dystonia. More specifically, this is a clear example of embouchure dystonia. It really looks like muscular chaos, doesn't it?
One can imagine somebody of this age and stature in their field who's dedicated their whole lives to becoming an outstanding performer, getting a doctorate in this instrument, and having these kinds of problems. So his neuromotor control system is obviously a problem for him. He can't control his facial muscles. And this is occurring pianists in their hands, clarinetists in their hands, obviously brass players in their facial muscles, and saxophone, and so on and so forth. That's just one small indication of the kinds of things that we're talking about are directly associated with learning and performing music. So yeah, maybe this should have been my first slide, but I wanted to kind of give you a taste of what we're going to talk about before. I just wanted to thank the committee for inviting me here. It's my second time to South Africa, first time to Durban, and it's a real treat. And it's a humbling experience in light of the fact that I'm co-presenting, I guess, as Keynote with some very distinguished academics and researchers. Very, very humbling, especially for a jazz trumpet player, which is how I primarily identify myself. And it also is important for me to be here, and I think for people who live in places where you don't see the kinds of things that you see every day. You know, walking around yesterday and the day before just here on the beach, it reminds me very clearly, it's in my face, that the world has all kinds of problems that need to be addressed. And I was heartbroken yesterday when I watched a young man digging through a garbage pan and pulling out a wrapper from some kind of ice cream sandwich or something and then licking it to see if he could get some nourishment from that paper. It was just heartbreaking to me. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here to see some of these things and also to understand some of the challenges that you have. It just shapes my attitudes about what I do, and I think every academic should travel the world and become familiar with challenges that other parts of the world are experiencing. And as an individual who firmly believes that our experiences in life are the basis for who we are, I appreciate the opportunity to be here to learn and to grow myself. I learned a tremendous amount yesterday from some of our conversations in some of the sessions, and certainly from the keynote and interactions that I've had with colleagues here in the evening, and I really appreciate that. That kind of brings me to a theoretical basis for what I do and how I think. Anybody know what this river is, by the way? South Africans? Zimbabwe, is that what it's called? Huh? Yeah. So I was just Googling rivers in South Africa and I came across this one, and I kind of put it up there just to showcase a couple ideas. So I think about the river as a metaphor for life. I challenge my students to think this way. You know, the river goes one way, doesn't turn around and go back. It has some quiet moments, it has some turbulent times. And in this case here, we see one small river merging with a bigger river. You know, I see myself as maybe the small river merging with the bigger river of academics here in South Africa. And I firmly believe that as a musician, as an academic, as a human being, that all of our experiences, our rivers of life, form the basis for who we are. In fact, I believe that we are a consequence. We embody, we represent all that we have done in life, all that we're doing in life, all that we've seen in life, all that we've read in life, all that we've discussed in life. We're an expression, we're an embodiment of that. So, for instance, over time, we can think about the river metaphor as being that provides the basis for who we are. It forms our behaviors, it informs our affects, our sensations, our images, our cognitions, our social relationships, and our biology. You know, when I have students in my class, I always challenge them to think about, where have you been? Where did you grow up? What social constructs did you grow up in? What family structures? What religious beliefs? What kind of resources did you have available to you? And that's your river. And everybody's got a unique river. Own it, live it, and think about how you're going to better it, because life is very dynamic as we move forward. Can't stop the river. So we take this one step further. We can think about society in general as perhaps deliberately creating opportunities and constraints on what we do in life in order to benefit from what we do, or to perhaps limit in some ways what we're exposed to or what we do in order to negate any negative consequences. And there's some theoretical models that I like to think about which identify sort of an embedded hierarchy of influences that might create opportunities or constraints on our behavior. The first one might be our family structures, micro level, the people that we hang around with. And a lot of these things are informed by where we go to work, or where we attended school, or what kinds of interactions we've had in our communities or in our healthcare systems. What have we learned? And then, of course, a nested hierarchy of structures might recognize national influences on what's taught in schools, what's done at healthcare institutions, and so on. We have sort of a macro level state and large area dynamics influence. And then, of course, we can stretch that out to a global framework, like the World Health Organization. And this point of view is very important because a lot of what we are encouraged to do in terms of opportunities and encouraged not to do in terms of constraints is closely aligned with the idea of occupational health. So in the United States, we have oversight for employers that mandate certain opportunities and constraints are occurring inside of the workplace under their purview. We have the Occupational Health and Safety Administration, for example, that requires certain types of monitoring, certain types of testing protocols, identification of hazards, safety and health concerns that might occur in the workplace. And these are legally binding requirements that an employer would have to align with. And it functions in a way that helps protect those of us who might be engaged in those kinds of activities. So extending this model a little bit further, there's not only a stream of causation metaphor here along two axes, time and levels of nested systems, social and biological organization, but there's also the question of social contexts as causes or at least influencers of disease, fundamental or otherwise. So you think about the musician community. We don't have any regulations. We don't have any research. We don't have any epidemiology, any public health related standards as to what we should be learning, right, as part of the opportunities we're afforded when we go to school. There's certainly any constraints on our behaviors, right? And making it even more challenging is the idea that there's distal factors that are really challenging to the behaviors and the knowledge bases of a group like the musician community, where there's traditions, there's these kinds of challenges that are hard to deny. I don't know why I've got this again here. And some of the frameworks that I'm using here come from the National Institutes of Health, Behavioral and Social Sciences Division, and they would label these kinds of things as risk regulators. So cultural norms and expectations aren't going to cause a problem, but they may lead to a problem because of a lack of identity of the problem, for instance, or a lack of awareness that the problem exists, a lack of knowledge about the problem. If I don't know about it and I don't know how to deal with it, then I'm more likely to get hurt, right? And music goes all the way back to, well, as far as we can record man's behavior. But certainly back 300 years ago where we had formalized instruction and we had a physician saying, yeah, in fact, these things do occur. To date, we have not had any formal oversight or concern about our occupational health needs. So our community is vastly underserved and unaware and uninformed. We don't have any laws, we don't have any policies, we don't have any regulations. Our environments are freewheeling. There's the kind of social structures where if a student shows up to the university and after a while they start having the kind of problem that Dr. Nestler has, or a piano player has problems with their hands or something, they might be labeled as not talented and perhaps go home. There's psychosocial hazards. You know, the idea of an orchestral musician raising their hand and saying, "Maestro, you've rehearsed us too long and my shoulder is screaming. I think we need to take a break." Any of you in music would think that would be absurd to have a musician stand up in a context like that on their own behalf related to a health problem. Choir director, we've sung now for 3 hours. I can feel things in my vocal cords that indicate I'm having some kind of vocal health concern. I think we need to take a break. It's unimaginable that that would happen in our university. Any university that has a school of music globally. And then we also have some issues related to commercial messaging. So we have things like hearing loss, a major, major problem within and beyond the musician community. The advent, digitalization of music, carry around in your pocket now files that allow you to listen to music endlessly without repetition for hours, days, weeks. We put things in our ears, we turn it up, and over time we lose our hearing. At the same time, we have occupational health and safety standards for hearing conservation that were intended to be used in industrial settings that are now being imposed upon the music field. In fact, the European Union ratified an oversight that's based on those standards for hearing health, and they applied it to the orchestra world and music making all across the European Union, and it doesn't work. And you have the exploitation of this model by companies trying to sell products that they believe works to protect the person. And in fact, if we don't educate ourselves about it, our education comes from manufacturers or marketers of products that are trying to tell us what they believe we should know. And of course, it's intended to sell products and make profit. So I kind of want to refer back to Polly's quote from yesterday, you know, do you have the courage to dance on the sharp edge of the blade? And going into a school of music and start saying, gee, maybe we ought to think about our rehearsal schedule. We ought to think about the maestro's attitude about how to work the students. Maybe we need to think about how we take a group and have them go to some kind of competition somewhere and expose them to certain types of things. It's very, very risky for somebody within music to start talking about this kind of thing because historically we just do not address it. So my goal has been to change the status quo so that embedded in the educational system, at least in the United States, where most formal education outside of private lessons, which could start even prior to grade school, 3 or 4 years old, it's not uncommon for a student to start taking piano lessons, for instance, but to embed into the school systems some kind of accountability to all these issues. So when you go to middle school and you're in band or choir or orchestra for the first time, you're being, instructed about these kinds of things. You're being informed about the consequences of overpractice or misuse of your body. and hopefully become aware of abusive kinds of practices. So you're developing an awareness, you're developing knowledge and the capacity and the competency to manage your own music making, so that when your river of life merges into your professional role, you're fully prepared. Now, why am I interested in this? Well, I don't know. I suppose that my personal experiences as a musician and as a researcher have brought me to a point where I just felt as though somebody's got to step up and start addressing this. So I was a young musician. Here's a picture of me, in 1978, 1 year after I graduated from high school. I had my own band in high school. I was out playing. And this was a promotional picture for a Holiday Inn gig that I had with a buddy that I still know and love. And, from those experiences to working 6 nights a week as a trumpet player, going to some of the most elite music schools in the world, getting an education all the way through the doctorate in music, knowing that this kind of stuff is not addressed, not even acknowledged, let alone applied, and personally experiencing friends like Dr. Nestler, who has this facial issue, and all kinds of other issues. I felt the need to kind of step up and start talking about it. And I suppose that attitude and drive in me is based on my experiences. It's a consequence of my embodiment of what I've seen in life. By the way, let's not deny one really important clue in this picture, too, that is really, it's a strong hazard and a unique hazard in the arts, especially because it's unlikely that somebody who goes to work at a factory would be pouring themselves a glass of Jack Daniels, right? Where when you go to work as a musician, it would be in the context of alcohol, high drug use, all kinds of different issues that would happen, if you're playing in clubs, resorts, cruise ships, and even in classical venues. There's a lot of partying that goes on. So the idea is to, as a child becomes more and more educated, and they participate in music, they get to the end of their river in life, and they're still playing successfully without physical problems. We have a clinic on our campus for all students. We have about 35,000 students on in our university. We have a health and wellness center, as you can imagine. We have a special clinic just for our music majors that operates 2 days a week. And every one of those days, it's full of music students seeking help for these kinds of problems. A lot of them are minor. They can be quickly addressed, but we try to avoid it. Hearing health problems, vocal health problems, and of course, mental health problems. So kind of just extending the idea of a river metaphor, if you're in an occupation with high sound levels, whether it's a roadie for a concert traveling group or you're a musician, your inner ear hair cells will get damaged over time and you lose your ability to hear. I have this, noise-induced hearing loss. If you're using your vocal cords excessively and not thinking about vocal hygiene, it's not uncommon to have these kinds of nodes and cyst-like things on your vocal cords that you can see here on the right, even to a point where you might have to have surgery. So I started this agenda, and I want to kind of get to the multidisciplinarity part of this. When I graduated from college with my doctorate, I had the great fortune to have mentors that allowed me to increase the size and scope of my graduate committee. Specifically, in those days, I was interested in applying music in a medical way. My dissertation was titled something like The Effects of Music Vibration on the Reduction of Rheumatoid Arthritis Pain. So I was thinking about how to harness acoustical energy in the mechanical vibration, develop technology that I could deliver that energy to the human body in a way that targeted a very specific neural process that would mitigate the transmission of pain at the spinal cord level. And my committee consisted of my two major professors, both music professors, a music therapist, a physicist, a rheumatologist, and an electrical engineer. And ever since that kind of training, and I would encourage all faculty who have not had those kinds of experiences, we have a multidisciplinary committee for graduate work, to try this and do it, especially for the benefit of the student. It gave me the idea that, wow, I can't think that way. I can't see my problem through the lens of a physicist's eyeglasses, or I can see the way a rheumatologist might look at this. And it really opened up the idea that, wow, if I have a problem to solve, the bigger and stronger the group that I can amass to address this problem, the more successful I'll be. No question about it. And I attribute a lot of what I'm going to show you now to doing just that in my own research. And by the way, I'm not going to get into details about specific research during this lecture, but we're going to have a workshop right after that. And if you're interested about that kind of thing, please come over and we can talk about research specifically. But the consequences of all that research has led to changes in the national standards for accreditation for over 650 music schools in the United States. So when I started this in 2004 was the first initial launch of this discussion. Here we have in 2011 the first ever accreditation standard that requires and mandates every music school in the United States to address these issues. And then more recently, Texas, the first state and still the only state in the United States, we've been able to get the Texas Education Agency to mandate learning objectives for every child in middle school and high school band, orchestra, and choir. Explore these health topics, describe these health topics, demonstrate knowledge of these health topics, apply the knowledge, and analyze these health topics. So how did this happen? Head, heart, hand, or maybe heart, head, and hand. So to me, any researcher who's going to be successful, where not only are you publishing papers, and making an impact that way, participating in the scholarly discourse, you want your research to be relevant. You want it to be consequential. You want something to happen that's magical for the benefit of those that you're concerned about, whatever issue it is. So not only do you have to have the passion, I think, you have to do due diligence, you have to have the head, you have to have the smarts, you have to be scholarly to the nth degree, you have to know what you're doing. But then you have to apply it somehow. You have to put your hands to the task and get the information out there, try to make things happen. And again, I think that's, in large part, my success has been due to the idea of interdisciplinary research. Particularly the kind of research that we would label, at least in the United States, the scholarship of integration. I know last year's conference, as I reviewed the keynote last year, they were talking about the scholarship of teaching and learning. Well, the Carnegie classification system of scholarship includes three types: that, the scholarship of discovery, and also the scholarship of integration. And what this is referring to is the idea that, wow, maybe there's practices and theories and ways of thinking about an issue that have already been tested and developed, but outside of the context that you're interested in. So you go over to this other field, you examine that and you think about it, and then you apply it, at least theoretically to begin with, and then maybe practically. So you're integrating what's already known and true, tried and true, into your scope of concern. And this makes things much, much easier than trying to develop all of that from the onset, the scholarship of integration. Teamwork. See opportunities everywhere. This is part of my problem personally. You know, we're talking about some of the problems here within the musician community. My brain just goes to, that's an opportunity. Yeah, it's a problem, but it's an opportunity, right? How can I get involved in it? Because it's an opportunity to learn and grow and make something positive happen. And then the other thing is never, ever give up. So just kind of getting back to the river metaphor, I'm going to give you a little timeline, show a couple, I guess, key steps in my river, and including some references to some other activities. Here's Ramazzini in 1700. Here's Lowell Mason, who was the young man who went into the Boston school board one day and argued that, wow, we should have kids taught music in the public schools. He made the argument. There wasn't public school music education. And his argument was actually based on the fact that, or at least he believed, that if a kid was playing a musical instrument, they'd be more resistant to the pollution of industrialized Boston. And imagine in the late 1800s how much soot and smoke and pollutants were in the air. These factories were not regulated yet, and kids were having all kinds of respiratory problems. And he was successful. University of North Texas, where I'm at, was one of the first universities ever to offer jazz education, started 125 years ago approximately. Texas Music Education Association, our state education association, was founded in 1920. Our accrediting body was 1924. Remember, the first ratified standard to protect musicians was just in the last couple of years, so they've been around for a long time. 1999, I was hired and I started the Center for Music and Medicine. My first big project was funded by the National Endowment for the Arts, the Grammys, and a couple other foundations to amass a group of people and several associations to have a discussion. Let's have a discussion. What should we be doing about this? That led to a position paper, and I want to comment here to say to you, if you're doing something, you've got to write it down. All the effort that went into this particular activity, which was intense for a couple of years, culminated in a 4-page article that is still having international ramifications. So we wrote it down. We put in writing what it is that we believe needs to happen. What are our findings? We articulated it. I have students that will get involved in research, maybe do a dissertation, and then they won't publish an article. I said, my gosh, you're not following through to make sure that you have a track record of what you've done, what you said, what you want to accomplish. This was that paper for this whole agenda. It was published in the Medical Problems of Performing Artists Journal in 2006. Between 2006 and 10, we struggled like crazy to try to get the accrediting body to adopt our recommendations. And as any of you who've worked with these kinds of associations know, it's just grueling. It's very difficult, very, very difficult to get an accrediting body to do anything on your behalf. They have their own deliberative practices. We kept pushing and pushing and pushing. We'll take care of it someday, we'll get at it, Kris. Anyway, between that time, 2004 and 2010, I started to measure things in our College of Music, specifically sound energy. And I looked at that energy level through the lens of occupational safety hazard thresholds that would be applied in a factory setting. And of the 600 different ensemble rehearsals that I measured, 40% of them, in 50 minutes, less than an hour, exceeded that standard for a full 8-hour workday. 40% of our ensemble, we call them ensemble-based instructional activities. So you learn by being in the ensemble. Kid get credit. That classroom scenario generated sound levels, we documented it, that are equivalent to or in excess of the national standard for practice for protecting people from hearing loss under an OSHA-regulated environment. 40% of those activities. That caused people to really wake up, like, oh my gosh, am I going to get sued? Am I liable? What do I do now? And even with that, the accrediting body was still not willing to take this on. Pushing. Then the CDC, our Centers for Disease Control, got involved. They gave me this national award for my work in hearing health. Then the national attention, the visibility of this issue became so hot, so intense, that the accrediting body finally said, yes, we're going to address it. That's when we had the first ratified standard. 2014, we hired a full-time faculty in our medical school. We've had relationships with our Health Sciences Center for years, but this guy was full-time just to work with me in our center. And we expanded our scope, we changed our name. Health is more than medicine. It provides a broader concept of what we're doing. The Texas Education Agency ratified its standard for public schools. Very important precedent worldwide. We had a symposium last fall, and this was really important because this was the first time where faculty were willing to go on camera live and talk about their own personal experiences. We finally cracked that resistance, that fear of disclosure open. We know faculty and musicians have these problems, they just don't want to talk about it. But we created an environment where it's safe, and very, very effective. Dr. Nestler, as I showed you earlier, was one of those that was willing to step forward. So that brings us up to sort of a current scenario. What do we do now? How do we manage all this change? So we just, in fact, this week, there is a petition going to our accrediting body that's asking for accreditation approval to offer the first PhD in music with a concentration in performing arts health at our university. Our university just gave us 3 doctoral fellowships to support this. We're going to matriculate our first set of students next fall, and we hope to have 10 in our cohort, and the first degree of this type anywhere in the world. 2017, next week, we're going to move up to Pretoria. And we're going to, with Dr. Devroop, have a conversation about where is South Africa with this discussion. South Africa is like to the world what New Orleans is like to the United States. It's a very, very important cultural phenomena with music at its core. But South Africa has yet to organize around this idea in ways similar to other countries. We have the Association for Performing Arts Health in Australia, Canada, the United States, France, Britain, Spain, the Netherlands, Scandinavian countries. And next March, we're going to have the first ever meeting, a consortium of national associations to discuss this in the Netherlands, in Denmark. And South Africa will be there as the new entry into this discussion. So the big challenge, addressing the primary determinant of health problems associated with learning and performing music. Does anybody have an idea what that is? What's the primary thing that drives a health problem in this context? Go ahead, raise your hand and offer one big factor. All our research shows that there's one thing that influences the potential for a health problem to occur, more than any. Any ideas? Whether it's sound levels, musculoskeletal loading, vocal use, it's the way we play music. It's the way we manage our musical behaviors. That's where we dance on the sharp edge of the knife. Because now you're telling somebody that, wait, the way you're conducting is the concern. The way you're teaching is the concern. And there's a fear among musicians who have never had this discussion before. They don't understand what we're talking about. Fear of compliance with the standard, incompliance. Fear of being measured and labeled as risky. You're a risky faculty. How would you like that to have happen? This is kind of like what sports medicine went through 30 years ago. All of a sudden a coach was, hey, you can't practice your students like that. We have to have some regulations around that. Fear of measurement equating to musical quality or educational quality. Fear of own hearing loss affecting ensemble sounds. Fear of becoming regulated like EU schools. Concerns for academic and artistic freedom. Fear of investing in something that doesn't work. There are acoustics firms, for example, that are going around the United States schools of music saying, I can go in there and modify your rehearsal space for $400,000 and you won't have the same level of concern for noise levels. That's a fallacy. The number one reason why the levels are high is based on how we make our music. Music is a verb. We behave musically. How we behave is the problem. So I leave this, higher education is opportunity, and open it up for questions.
Thank you, Kris, for those very important insights into a profession that many of us have been engaged with. I didn't know that studying music could be dangerous to your health. Now I'm much more aware of that. And actually, when most of us start playing music, what generally happens with musicians is that we buy the cheapest gear, the cheapest music equipment. In our cases, there was one microphone. You're standing in a rock band with these speakers behind you, and you got to play. And because there's only one microphone for the singer, you as a saxophone player have got to blow your lungs out in order to be heard at the back of the stage. So I think the points that you're making are important. I just have one question for you before I want to open the floor up to questions. You have some senior colleagues in your department that are based on a historical tradition of the way they would teach instruments. The piano teachers would look at their piano treatises, and the flute players, according to the historical texts, it was played like this in Bach's time and in Mozart's time, and that's the technique we use, and we're going to use that finger on that trill. How does your research go down with your colleagues who come from this kind of background when you start to challenge them with your evidence?
I could stand all here all day and giving examples of exactly what you're talking about. We are changing attitudes because we're doing research and we have data. And let me see, I'll give you an anecdote. Piano. So I had a student, her name was Dr. Eri Yushimura. She was from Japan, working on her doctorate in music performance, piano, excellent piano player. And she wanted to do her last senior recital, her last recital for her doctorate. She wanted to play Debussy. There's a whole collection of Debussy preludes that are just beautiful. And as she was practicing, she was having extreme hand pain. And she went to her faculty and inquired as to how she might get beyond these challenges. And after she was doing that for a while, she got the impression that the faculty believed she either wasn't practicing correctly, or she wasn't practicing enough, or perhaps she just wasn't talented. And she would take the advice of a faculty and start doing something a little differently. Nothing seemed to work. Her self-esteem started to diminish. And we heard about an idea that a few researchers have been exploring, which is the ergonomic modification of the piano. And we thought, wow, that's really interesting. Now, we're in a very large music school, as I said. We have over 400 pianos. We have a gigantic piano budget. We have 2 full-time staff who just manage our pianos. So they were able to get some resources together and purchase a keyboard that you can actually slide into a large concert grand Steinway piano in literally less than 10 minutes. So it's the same instrument, but it shrinks down the keys a little bit. And she started to mess around with this idea, and she started to do studies. And she, first of all, did some epidemiologic studies inside of the College of Music, asking students if they have similar problems. 86% of our piano majors have similar problems, 86%. We took many, many anthropometric measurements of their upper extremity. Anthropometric refers to the size of the digits, the limb lengths, hand span, hand girth, all kinds of different things. And then we did some performance measures. We wanted to see, is it related to the strength of the hand? So we did isometric strength, rotational speeds, all kinds of different measures. We looked at that data, and we tried to figure out what was most correlated with, right, with the idea of having pain. And the number one factor was hand span, the distance between here and here when the hands full out. That led us to think about, wow, what are the differences in hand sizes within the College of Music? We started measuring more hand sizes, and we found out, wow, the difference between the smallest and the biggest is a magnitude of 4 inches. Okay? So the smallest hand to the biggest hand is 4 inches. That's a lot of hand difference when you think about piano. She was on the small end of that scale. So we also, kind of were just going through the idea of, wait, how does it feel? Not really formal research. It's easier to play with a small keyboard. And it was remarkable. Her hand pain went away, and she was able to play. At the same time this was going on, there was a gentleman, a physician in Tokyo named Dr. Sakai. He took a break from his practice and he traveled all over Europe going to museums that housed historically relevant pianos. And he started to measure the octaves. And he published a paper that showed that, yeah, when Cristoforte invented the piano, it was about the same size keyboard as it is today. And then over the next couple hundred years, it was variable, but it went down. And we started to see the relationship between when music was composed and the size of the piano. Most virtuosic literature written for the piano was composed when the piano was actually narrower keys. Okay, so now we have the rationale to use this, not only to deal with the ergonomic limitations or the biomechanical limitations of small hands, we're accommodating that, but we're also playing a period-correct instrument. And she's saying, I can play this music beautifully without any pain. So how did the other faculty respond to that? That's cheating. What are you doing? In fact, I've presented this kind of thing to two national, actually international, the Clyburn Foundation, presented this data to two very, very serious piano competitors, and I said to the guys organizing the competition, hey, by the way, would you let the competitors pick and choose that piano? Especially if they're playing literature that was written in the time when the piano was that size? And I'm not kidding you, I've seen this. No way. If they don't have piano-sized hands, they can find something else to do. That's the distal problem.
Thank you, Kris. I see Robbie Dunpat in the front. You know, when Robbie comes up front, you know you have problems. Not financial ones, timing ones. And I think as musicians, we know the value of time. For us, it's the very essence of what we do. So I'm going to open the floor up for just 3 questions. And please, I have to appeal to you. Keep your questions to 20 words, not more than 20 words. I have to appeal to you. Professor Chesky is here the entire day, and he's here tomorrow. His room is upstairs somewhere. I'm not going to give you the number right now, but you can join us for the session thereafter. You can ask him the questions there if you have. So if you have any questions, please raise your hand, identify yourself first, and the question. We have 1, 2, and Professor Amin. 1, 2. Could you please stand when you ask your question? Thank you, sir.
Thank you for the brief. Yeah. All right. My name is Nati Madondo from Rhodes University, Faculty of Education. Okay, Nati Madondo from Rhodes University, Faculty of Education. The question is not directly related, but there is something that you mentioned, Prof, that you talked about early experiences and later experiences. Now, I want to ask that, because that seems very important, how do we assist? You know, I'm not sure if that is the right word, but I would use it for convenience. How do we assist academics, for example, you know, to tap into or acknowledge the knowledge resources that students bring with them when they enter university? All right, because when they enter university, the likelihood, research is showing that what they bring with them to university, it's like they have to start on a clean slate, you know, not acknowledging what they already have, which they bring with them to university. And that plays a big role in accessing disciplinary knowledge or whatever knowledge of the field that they have to access. So tapping into knowledge resources that they already have. How can we assist academics to tap into those? Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure what the question was. I'm sorry, my dialect is, and my accent is probably foreign to you a little bit too. It's hard for me to understand fully what you're asking, but I think you're asking about how can we access information that might help students. One way would be to teach students how to seek out information, the kind of information, make them aware that there is information, and then point them to some resources that you could find. In fact, I wanted to show you a list of publications and things from our own website that you could download PDFs from. There's an emerging database of resources. Am I in the right direction in terms of your question?
Okay, you can engage him later.
Yeah, we can talk about this later. I really want to be correct in what you're asking, but okay.
Thank you. I am Professor Sineko Kutuma, the Dean of Teaching and Learning for the College of Health Sciences. The question probably may actually be answering even that one. Have you seen or have you used the opportunities for interprofessional education and interprofessional practice, especially for health science students or health science programs in this? Because as I was listening to your question, I was just seeing occupational therapists being involved there, audiologists, public health specialists, nurses, medical students, and everybody. And the question then is, in your university, have you looked at the unit as an interprofessional education and practice center for the College of Health Sciences or the Faculty of Health Sciences? Because already that is brewing in my head as
Yes.
one great opportunity.
Yes. Thank you for that question. And absolutely, yes, of course. So we have actually helped mentor the students in other disciplines that have shown interest in these areas. So we do need counselors and psychologists who are prepared to deal with this occupational group. We do need audiologists. We do need speech-language pathologists who know about voice health as it relates to singing. We do need, certainly in the public health disciplines, health education, health promotion, health and safety, epidemiology, biostatistics, all that stuff is necessary ingredients for success in dealing with this. And when we pair students together, the magic happens. In fact, we just published a paper that was the consequence of an computer science engineering PhD. So here's a student doing his dissertation in computer science engineering, writing algorithms that are smart learning, have smart learning potential in terms of understanding historical records of sound exposures so that we're better able to manage them. So absolutely. But on the other hand, I sit in the music space, and it's my responsibility to encourage the growth and awareness and competency within my field. But clearly there's an eagerness to, and I think an openness. You're probably excited about maybe the potential yourself, right? Yeah, absolutely.
Great. And our final question from Nena. Thank you.
I'm from the School of Education, and someone who works on the serrated edge of interdisciplinary research. So how do we encourage colleagues who see interdisciplinary work as intellectually unhygienic?
I think that the magic happens when you find colleagues who are really interested in research for the purposes that I'm kind of referring to. You know, there's a passion to address a problem, a similar passion to address noise-induced hearing loss, for instance, or a passion to be a good health educator. So I want to be a good health educator in the public space. Here's an opportunity to partner with somebody who works in that space, who needs the kind of expertise I have in building a team like that. But there's clearly challenges institutionally. You know, it's hard for institutions to kind of get out of this silo mindset where, you know, you get this over there and this over here, but to break down those barriers. And I've been very fortunate, although I've had, I think, 5 presidents in my university since I've been there, and you can see the differences in their attitudes about interdisciplinarity and the support for that. And the one we have right now is very, very strongly encouraging all of us to work together. In fact, one of their mottos at the university right now is to change the acronym STEM, right? Because all the resources are going to science, technology, engineering, and math, to STEAM. So science, technology, education, arts, and math. To make sure that the creativity, you know, even though I would say researchers are very creative, but to get that artistic view mixed in with the computer science engineering and the health sciences and all that. So by design, from the top down, I think there can be an encouragement for that kind of activity. It is challenging, but it's certainly worth the effort to do it.
Lovely. Colleagues, I think I don't think we have run out of time. So would like to thank Professor Chesky for coming all the way and for his lovely address. We have for you, Kris, a special gift from Durban. I think my colleagues who purchased this gift didn't realize the theme of your topic, we would have probably given you a vuvuzela instead. It would have probably made it a bit interesting. However, please accept this on behalf of the University of KwaZulu-Natal and the Higher Education Teaching Conference. Thank you.